so Thorchain, the protocol is basically exactly this, what you just described. And then at what point does THORSWAP come in? Is THORSWAP just that front end that also like makes it able so that you can swap these assets from these different vaults? Maybe you can explain that part as well.
Yeah, happy to. So that's kind of how THORSWAP got its birth, right? Is in just being an interface for Thorchain. The protocol exists kind of like email in the background, but you need Outlook in order to use it, right? Nobody knows how to command line SMTP and send their messages out that way. So we had to, as THORSWAP, build the interface for people to come and provide liquidity, for people to make the swaps of all these different assets, to see what their portfolio balances are looking like, how much they've earned in yield, and all that kind of stuff. So that's definitely the genesis and birth of THORSWAP, is just being an interface for Thorchain. But now what we're working on and building in THORSWAP is to kind of expand the powers of Thorchain and connect the rest of the DeFi universe. So like Chad talked about, Thorchain is really good at connecting real native layer 1 assets. But those are mostly like short tail assets that we're talking about. So, you know, native Ethereum, Bitcoin, BNB, whatever it might be on each chain. Maybe there's going to be a handful of ERC20s, right? I think there's something like 20 ERC20 pools on Thorchain. But if you compare that with something like Uniswap, you know, you've got many thousands of ERC20s available. So we're doing DEX aggregation now with THORSWAP that basically enables the power of Thorchain, all these native layer 1 assets, to reach into all the long tail assets, all these deeper pools, more liquidity that's been siloed across other chains. So, you know, Ethereum is going to be the low hanging fruit first one there, but then definitely Cosmos coming down the line to be able to move, you know, between Atom and Bitcoin, first of all, which will be, you know, here within a few days. And then in the long term, any IBC asset straight into native Bitcoin transaction in a single interface, and vice versa. So basically, we just can build an interface using the power of Thorchain and all of these different aggregator contracts to connect any chain to any chain, any asset on any chain, and just make a really smooth user experience for everybody.
So just to capture that, so right now you are on THORSWAP, you're just tapping into the native liquidity on Thorchain, but in the future you plan to become more of an aggregator to also tap into the liquidity on other DEXs like Uniswap or I guess, I don't know, SushiSwap, a lot of Osmosis, on all these native layer 1s that you have integrated. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And we're very close in that march. Look for something, you know, I would say within a few weeks here to be live in mainnet. And the first low-hanging fruit, as I said, is going to be Ethereum, but then we'll move on to other chains. And in our first iteration, we're going to have Uniswap, SushiSwap, 0x, 1inch. So you should have pretty comprehensive coverage of basically everything in the Ethereum world right out of the gate there.
Yeah, that's pretty big, because if you think about it, like what THORSWAP is doing is they're building a DEX aggregator that has connections and relationships to more assets and more liquidity than any other DEX in the entire planet. Like literally, that is actually what they're fundamentally doing. And so they're not only just pulling upon the liquidity of what Thorchain is currently providing, but they're pulling on the assets and liquidity of many DEXs across many ecosystems. Like that is huge. Like you'll be able to get pretty much any asset you want on THORSWAP without needing to figure out, oh, I'm on this ecosystem, so I need to use this thing. I got to figure out a bridge to get over this other thing. Like none of that. You just go to THORSWAP, get your assets, trade, swap, done, out, gone. That's pretty amazing.
I think it would be really, really cool for the audience to really, really understand what that actually means and how it differentiates to anything else on the market right now. You mentioned earlier wrapped assets, and on Thorchain, the big selling point is that you're trading native assets, right? So can you just like on a very basic high-level overview explain what that means? What's the difference between the two?
Yeah, so one of the big problems with wrapped assets is that you have this prolonged security exposure. So say you're using a wrapped asset on, just using Wormhole as an example, and something happens to the Wormhole bridge, and some of the funds are stolen that are backing that wrapped asset, that fake asset that you're holding in your wallet. Well, then all your capital is gone, right? You just got screwed, like you're done, right? So you have, as long as you're holding that wrapped asset, you're exposed to whatever happens on that bridge you use to get across it, which is inherently problematic, at least from my perspective, that's true. But on Thorchain's case, like if you swap Bitcoin for Ethereum, or whatever, you don't take on exposure after the swap, right? So as long as you are exposed for just effectively a single block on Thorchain, then like the amount of exposure is extraordinarily small. And so like you don't care tomorrow if Thorchain gets hacked or the whole thing blows up or like whatever. You don't really care anymore because you already used it for what you're trying to use it for, and you won't take on any risk or exposure to it. But in a wrapped asset, you do, and that's inherently like problematic. Not to mention that like a wrapped asset has to be backed by something, like the ETH, for example, right, that underlies a wrapped ETH on Solana or some other chain. And like, well, what's the mechanism we make sure that ETH is still there, right? What's to stop the individuals who are running the multi-sig that controls that ETH from just getting up and walking off with the ETH underneath it, and then like chilling out on a beach in Fiji or whatever. And in most cases, in almost all cases, actually in all cases that I can think of at least, you rely on altruism, because the amount of ETH they have at their disposal is worth a lot more money than they actually use to provide bond or security. At least in most cases, that's true. And in Thorchain's case, it's the reverse. In all cases, in all scenarios, all validators of this network have more money to lose than they can potentially gain, right? So that always creates the economic incentive that you cannot steal from this network and be profitable.
Yeah.